Under the rust-colored skies of the village of Karindi, a child was born beneath a moon that refused to wane. Her cries were soft, not like a child newly separated from the warmth of the womb, but like a whisper from something older, something that had waited too long to return. The midwives wrapped her in palm leaves and salt as was tradition, but they didn't speak a word when they noticed the strange thing about her shadow. It moved. Not with her, not always. It pulsed slightly like the flutter of bat wings, and sometimes curled around her toes when she lay still. No one said it aloud that night, but every woman in that room left with a silence in her chest, like a drumbeat that had missed a step. They named her Nia, meaning purpose, because her father believed that such an unusual entrance into the world must be tied to a greater calling. Her mother, a soft-spoken weaver named Sephu, never got to whisper the name. She bled out into the earth before sunrise, her spirit crossing into the next world with the last contraction. Some whispered that the shadow took more than light, it had taken Sephu's breath. But her father, Baraka, refused to believe it. He buried his sorrow beneath work, beneath silence, beneath the obligation of raising a daughter with a shadow that made elders grip their charms tighter. Nia grew quickly, a quiet child with large eyes that missed nothing. She seldom cried. She watched. Her fingers danced on walls, tracing patterns she hadn't been taught. She seemed to listen not just to words but to the sounds behind them, the rustle of thoughts, the shifting of intent. The village children played together under the mango trees, their laughter echoing like bells across the dusty compounds, but Nia was different. Children would play near her but not too close. If they did, sometimes strange things happened. A stone would crack underfoot. A wind would rise from nowhere and toss leaves into their eyes. Once, a boy claimed that when Nia looked at him, his voice left him for a whole afternoon. He came back crying, pointing at her, but his mother only told him not to speak ill of the dead, because that's what they thought Nia's shadow was. A ghost. An echo. Baraka remarried when Nia was 5. The new wife, Adana, was beautiful in a sharp way, cheekbones like cut glass and lips that barely curled into anything kind. She wore perfumes from the coast and brought discipline into the home like a new broom that never stopped sweeping. She treated Nia with a politeness too thin to trust. Never cruel, not at first. Just distant, measured, as if she were always waiting for Nia to do something wrong. But it wasn't Nia who brought tension into the home, it was the child Adana bore soon after. Jimo. Born on the first night of the long rains, Jimo entered the world with fists clenched and a wail that tore through the banana trees outside. Unlike Nia, he cried for hours. He kicked. He bit the breast that fed him. He was loud, demanding, and alive in a way that forced the house to shift its rhythm around him. Adana glowed when she held him. Baraka tried to balance the weight of his 2 children, but Jimo grew like fire, eager, unpredictable, always needing. And Nia? She grew like water, calm, deep, and still. From the beginning, Jimo was told, in whispers and stories, that his sister was odd. Not wrong, just different. When he was old enough to ask why the elders lowered their voices when Nia passed, Adana would shrug and say, "Some children are born marked. But not you. You are like the sun, clear, bright, proud." He didn't know what it meant then, but he repeated it to himself every time Nia walked by and her shadow flickered against the ground like a flag in a wind no one felt. By the time he was 10, Jimo had started watching Nia more closely. She never shouted. She rarely played. She walked as if she carried something ancient on her back, and people always looked twice when she passed. Not with love, not with hate, just caution, as if they might disturb something sleeping beneath her skin. Her shadow, even more now, seemed to have a mind of its own. Jimo swore he saw it move in the opposite direction once when she turned. Another time, it split briefly into 2 before rejoining itself. He told his mother, who told him to stop staring and mind his chores. But Jimo had already started building a story in his head, one in which Nia wasn't just odd, she was wrong and he was right. He was the real child of the house. She was the intruder with a shadow that whispered to walls. What made it worse was that Nia was loved in subtle ways. The old herbalist, Mama Kwitu, gave her dried hibiscus without asking. The cattleman once let her braid the hair of his favorite goat and said nothing. Even the blind drummer, Mzee Odieno, said her footsteps had rhythm. Jimo hated that. He shouted louder, ran faster, brought his mother dead beetles and feathers to make her smile. He broke rules just to test the limits of their attention. But still, when Nia entered a room, the air changed. Not with joy. Not with noise. Just with presence. One afternoon, while playing near the well, Jimo fell and scraped his arm badly on a jagged stone. Blood dripped in thick drops and he cried, holding his arm to his chest. Other children ran for help, but Nia came and knelt beside him. She said nothing. Just pressed her palm near the wound and whispered something he couldn't hear. The bleeding slowed. He stared at her, more in fear than gratitude. Her shadow had wrapped around his foot like a vine. He pushed her away and told everyone she cursed him. They didn't believe him, not fully, but from that day on some of the children stayed farther from Nia. Jimo noticed. He smiled in secret. By 12, Nia had become a mystery even to herself. She felt the pull of her shadow, when it tensed, when it lengthened without light, when it whispered from corners her ears couldn't catch but her bones could feel. She never told her father. He worked too hard and aged too fast. She never told Adana, who only looked at her with eyes sharp enough to cut and cold enough not to care. Nia had learned silence the way other children learned songs. And Jimo? He had grown bold. He spoke louder than anyone at the fire. He told stories in which he was the hero and the brave one. He mimicked the drummers, danced like warriors and made others laugh. But behind the laughter was a bitterness, a silent tally of every time Nia was mentioned, every glance she received, every strange happening that left people whispering about her instead of him. In his heart, envy grew teeth. Not just of her shadow, but of the way she walked through the world untouched by the noise he fought so hard to make. Their home was filled with tension too quiet to be named. At dinner, Adana served Jimo with pride and passed Nia's plate without looking. Baraka, though kind, had begun to fade from his children, his eyes always distant, always tired. Nia ate in silence, her shadow curling beneath the mat like a pet no one could name. Jimo watched it always. He told himself that one day he'd find a way to step out from under it, to make it disappear. To finally prove he wasn't the one in the shadow, but the one meant to stand in the light. He did not know then that the darkness, once disturbed, chooses not just to haunt, but to answer. And it never forgets the names of those who envy its touch. In the years that followed, the compound changed, not in its structure but in its air. What once was filled with ordinary silences became pregnant with hesitation, as if even the breeze thought twice before crossing its threshold. The mango tree at the center of the yard dropped fewer fruits. The chickens clucked in lower tones. And the compound dogs, once wild and carefree, now watched Nia from corners with eyes that didn't blink. Nia had grown into a girl of 13 now, tall and slender, with a presence that made people step aside, not with fear but with a curious caution. Her eyes were deep and dark, as if the night had lent her its wisdom. She asked many questions, of the trees, of the old, of the wind. Not always aloud. Sometimes just in the way she watched the world, soaking in answers no one else could hear. She was kind. She helped when others needed it, even when they didn't thank her. She offered smiles to those who didn't smile back. She gathered herbs for Mama Quitu and fed the goats when Jimo forgot. But her kindness was quiet, uncelebrated, untrustworthy in the eyes of many. Strange things happened around her. Always had, but now more often. It started small. A jug of milk curdled on the mat minutes after she passed by. The gourd was fresh, straight from the calabash. The family said nothing, but Adana watched her from behind the curtain that night, her fingers wrapped around the edge like claws. Then there were the crows. Dozens of them, black and raucous, began perching on the baobab tree nearest their gate. They didn't come every day, only when Nia was home alone. They cawed in unison, sometimes as if they were arguing, other times like they were calling for something. Nia didn't flinch. She would look up at them with curiosity, not fear, as if she understood their noise in a way the others did not. A few times one would follow her all the way to the stream and back, fluttering just above her, never landing. Children began mimicking the calls and shouting, "Nia's birds are here," when they spotted the crows. Their mothers pulled them back into their huts when they did. Then came the story of the old fisherman. He swore by his own wife's grave that he saw Nia's shadow walk past his hut when Nia herself had not left her compound that day. The shadow, he said, moved like smoke, slow and thick, curling around the cooking pot before vanishing into the banana trees. His neighbors laughed at him, until his fishing net tore for no reason the next morning, and his cat disappeared. He stopped speaking of it after that, but he never looked at Nia the same way again. Whispers began. Like wind through the market stalls, they rustled from ear to ear, growing more sinister each time. She was born the night her mother died. The shadow drinks milk and curses goats. She walks in 2 places at once. The drumbeat skips when she claps. Even the elders, who prided themselves on logic, on root-based healing, on knowledge, stopped defending her. They simply said, "Some children are touched by things we do not name." Jimo heard all of it. He did not correct the rumors. He added to them. She stares into the fire and it goes out, he'd say with a low voice around the other boys. Her shadow walks even when she sleeps. I saw it once, longer than a man even though she was sitting. He'd lean in wide-eyed, and the boys would either laugh nervously or nod with fascination. Either way, he liked how it made him feel, taller, louder, important. And yet, beneath that ego, a growing seed of fear was rooting itself into his bones. He was afraid of her. Not just the way children fear dark places, but in a deeper, more uncomfortable way. Afraid of how she seemed untouched by everything that wounded him. Afraid of how she could sit alone in the shade, braiding dry grass, while he craved attention like air. Afraid of how her presence made people lower their voices, made the air thick, made the village shiver. Most of all, he was afraid that she knew what he thought. Because sometimes she would look at him, not harshly, not with scorn, but with an expression so knowing it made him itch. Like she could hear the echo of his jealousy before he even said a word. One evening, just before the moon rose, Jimo sat by the outer gate carving a wooden whistle. He could hear Nia humming to herself as she swept the compound with a dry broom. It wasn't a tune he recognized, something rhythmic, ancient, as if it had no beginning. As she hummed, her shadow moved across the earth, long and strange, almost reaching his feet. He stood and shouted, "Stop that noise. You sound like a ghost." Nia stopped humming but didn't respond. Her eyes met his, calm as ever. "That shadow of yours," he continued, walking toward her. "It's not right. You're not right. Mama says shadows belong to the body. Yours doesn't." Nia didn't blink. "Then why are you talking to it?" The words stung. They weren't angry, just factual. Like water slipping under a locked door. Jimo's fists clenched, but he said nothing more. He backed away, angry with himself for feeling shaken, for letting her silence win again. That night he dreamed of the crows. Only this time they weren't perched. They were walking like humans in robes of feathers, chanting in a language his ears couldn't hold. In the center of their circle stood Nia, her face blank, her shadow rising behind her like a mountain of wings. He woke in sweat. The whistle he'd carved was broken in two beside his mat. The next few days he avoided her. He busied himself with errands, with stories, with his own reflection. But Nia's presence hung over the compound like a curtain. And the villagers kept whispering. Women whispered near water pots. Men did so near the market fire. No one confronted Baraka directly, out of respect. But the space around Nia widened, like even sound knew not to come too close. One afternoon, Mama Kwitu visited the compound for herbs. Nia, polite as always, offered to help gather them. As they walked together, the old woman said softly, "Your shadow, it's changing." Nia looked up at her, unsure how to respond. Mama Kwitu didn't elaborate. She only added, "Not all darkness is bad. But it always comes with a price. And it never forgets kindness, or cruelty." Then she pressed a dry red root into Nia's hand and left. Jimo watched it all from the upper room window. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the exchange. And it burned in his chest. He stormed into his mother's kitchen. "She's a witch. Even Mama Kwitu gives her things. I saw it. She talks to the birds. To the dark. Why does no one see it?" Adana looked up slowly, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Do you fear her?" "No," Jimo snapped. But his eyes said otherwise. "Then leave her be," she said, turning away. "The village has a long memory and a short patience. Let it do the work." Jimo didn't sleep well that night. He kept hearing the crows again, louder now, as if they were inside the compound walls. He told himself it was the wind. Just the wind. But as he lay awake, staring into the shadows on his wall, one of them seemed to flicker, briefly, and stretch toward him. Jimo sat beneath the kola tree long after the compound had fallen asleep. His fingers dug absently into the dirt while his thoughts swirled like a storm refusing to die. Every creak in the night felt like it was whispering her name, Nia. Nia with the voice like dusk. Nia with the eyes like secrets. Nia, whose shadow made the leaves twitch and the birds scatter. He hated her. He hated how the elders lowered their voices around her, not around him. He hated how Mama Kwitu watched her with that curious reverence, like a seed that might split the earth open. He hated how his own mother's eyes tightened when Nia passed, like she feared what she could not name. Most of all, he hated how invisible he felt beside her. He tried everything. Outshining her in chores. Speaking louder than her stories. Mimicking the elders' knowledge just to earn a nod. But the village still watched Nia from the corners of their eyes, from thresholds and behind mats, as if she was the storm and he, the passing breeze. That night, something inside him snapped. He got up, barefoot, and left the compound. He didn't take a lantern. He didn't need one. The moon hung low, veiled behind drifting clouds, and the stars blinked faintly, like they too were uncertain of what was about to unfold. Jimo made his way to the forest edge, past the banana groves and the abandoned yam fields. The trees here grew dense, whispering to each other with dry, rustling tongues. He stepped over a fallen log, then another. His skin prickled. The air thickened. Even the insects went quiet. He had heard the stories. All the boys had. There was a woman in the forest, a priestess, some said. A shadow walker, others claimed. They whispered her name only once and never again. She lived where the old roots curled and the sun never fully touched the earth. They said she dealt in things not even the spirits would barter. No one went to her unless they were desperate. Or foolish. Jimo was both. He found her hut just past the gnarled fig trees. It was crooked, like it leaned toward the ground on purpose. Strings of bones dangled from the doorframe, swaying despite the stillness of the air. The scent of burnt herbs and wet clay hung thick. Jimo hesitated. His legs wanted to turn. But then he thought of Nia's shadow trailing behind her, calm and unnerving, and his fists clenched. He stepped forward and knocked. The door creaked open before his hand touched it. Inside it was dim, lit only by a few embers and a soft blue glow that seemed to have no source. The walls were lined with jars, some filled with eyes that blinked, others with smoke that twisted into faces. In the center sat the priestess. She was old, older than anyone he'd ever seen. Her skin hung like draped cloth, and her eyes were milky but sharp. Her fingers were long and bony, tipped with dark nails that scratched symbols into the dirt. She did not speak. "I want to be seen," Jimo said. Not just next to her, above her. Still the priestess said nothing. She dipped her fingers into a bowl of ash and began to draw on the floor. A crescent. A spiral. A shadow with no body. "She's not normal," he added. "Her shadow doesn't belong to her. It belongs to something else. It moves wrong. I see it." Now the priestess looked up. "It does not move wrong," she rasped. "It moves free." Jimo frowned. "She was born with it," the priestess continued. "Before breath, the darkness chose her. That shadow is not a trick. It is memory, an echo of what the world once knew but forgot. In it lies power. Old power. Before gods had names." "Then teach me how to take it," Jimo said, stepping forward. "She doesn't deserve it. She wastes it. I can hold it better." The priestess smiled. "It wasn't kind. You cannot hold it. Not truly. But you can bind it. You can steal its path for a time." She opened a small gourd and poured a thick, black liquid into a bowl. Jimo watched as it hissed and bubbled. Smoke rose, not upward but sideways, curling toward his feet. "There is a ritual," she said. "To unmoor a shadow, you must betray what trusts you, use fire that hates you, and speak words no heart should say. Do this at the moment between moonrise and midnight. Then the shadow will flee its host, and in its confusion you can burn it. That fire will make room. Fate, left hollow, will seek another." Jimo's chest pounded. "You mean it will choose me?" "Not choose," the priestess said. "Settle. Until it finds better." She handed him a pouch of ash, a bone needle, and a piece of cloth that shimmered with darkness. "Mark her path with this," she instructed. "Where she steps, drop the ash. Let it know you watch. Prick your thumb with the needle at the moment of the flame. Your blood must mark your desire. Then burn the cloth beside her shadow. Do not touch her. Only the shadow. Touching her binds you to her fate." Jimo nodded, though his mouth was dry. The priestess's eyes narrowed. "And know this, boy, shadows are not easily fooled. They remember who feared them. They remember who watched them burn." He left the hut as dawn broke, feeling colder than when he arrived. Back in the compound, everything felt too bright. Nia sat beneath the tamarind tree, weaving dry grass into bracelets. Her shadow stretched beside her, as always, calm, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. He watched her from the doorway, fingers clutching the pouch of ash. He had what he needed. He only lacked one thing: timing. He waited 3 days. Each day, he followed her with eyes like knives, laying down the ash behind her where she walked, murmuring the chant he had been given. The shadow did not react, not at first. But on the 3rd day, he noticed it twitch slightly when it passed a patch of earth he'd marked. It recoiled, like a snake sensing poison. That night he prepared. He told his mother he would keep the fire near the compound watch gate, just in case of wild dogs. She nodded without looking up. It was a lie, but she was used to his excuses. He set everything in place: the cloth folded beneath dried brush, the bone needle, the ash lines, and a small calabash of palm oil to feed the flame. Then he waited. Nia came outside just before the moon rose. She often did, she said the night air helped her think. She walked slowly, humming to herself again. That strange tune. The shadow trailed behind her, but tonight it seemed wary. It swayed unnaturally, pulsing along the ground like it sensed a trap. She reached the tamarind tree. Jimo struck. He pricked his thumb, let the blood drip onto the cloth, and whispered the words, darkness displaced, fire embrace, fate replace. Then he threw the flame. The brush caught instantly. A rush of heat and smoke filled the yard. The fire licked at the cloth, burning fast, then faster, until the shadow Nia had cast began to ripple and pull. Moved. It screamed. Not in sound but in feeling. The earth groaned beneath them. The tamarind leaves shivered. The chickens shrieked and scattered. Nia turned in horror, not at Jimo, but at her own shadow as it writhed on the ground like a creature stabbed. It pulled toward the fire, dragged against its will. Jimo stood tall. Triumph blazed in his chest. But then the fire changed. It did not consume the shadow. Instead the shadow split. One part of it clung to Nia, curling around her feet. The other, the one Jimo had marked, turned slowly toward him. It moved into the fire. The flames turned black. Then they moved toward him. Jimo screamed. The last thing he saw before the world went dark was a hand, not Nia's, not human, emerging from the flame and touching his chest. Not in pain, in claiming. And deep in the woods, the priestess stirred in her sleep and whispered, "So it begins." Under a sky painted silver by the full moon, the village of Moima gathered in joyous rhythm. The air was thick with the scent of roasted yams, fermented maize, and the sweet burn of incense offered to the old gods. Drums pulsed like a collective heartbeat, drawing feet into dance and memories into motion. The moon festival had come, an ancient celebration of light within darkness, unity among the scattered, and reverence for the spirits that walked when the moon was at its most watchful. Nia wore a dress of woven blue and silver strands, stitched by the elders to reflect moonlight itself. Around her ankles jingled tiny bells, around her wrists shells that whispered with each movement. Her face was calm, but her eyes held fire, the kind that does not burn but remembers. She stood near the sacred flame in the center of the village square. It danced tall and clear in the breeze, fed by palm oil and prayers. Around it, the villagers moved in wide circles, their feet stomping, hands clapping in praise of the ancestors. The drummers, seated low with sweat streaking their backs, beat rhythms passed down for generations. Nia began to dance. Not with flair, not with pride, but with something else. Grace perhaps. Stillness in motion. She did not leap or spin wildly. Her steps were measured, her arms flowing like water finding forgotten paths. As she danced, her shadow stretched behind her, mirroring every movement like a twin bound by spirit. And those watching couldn't help but feel that she wasn't just performing, she was communing with something older, something they could not name but felt pulsing in their marrow. Jimo watched from the edge of the crowd, heart galloping in his chest. He clutched a small gourd under his tunic. Inside it were ashes, black and gray, from the ancestors' pyre, stolen the night before from the edge of the sacred grove. It was a sin beyond most, desecrating what had been offered to the old spirits. But Jimo told himself it was necessary. Righteous. Fate, after all, had overlooked him long enough. He waited until Nia reached the third cycle of the dance, the moment when she paused beside the sacred flame to offer her final bow. It was a moment of vulnerability, when the body stilled and the spirit opened to receive the ancestors' blessing. The village's eyes were all on her, entranced. Jimo slipped into the shadows behind the fire circle. He moved to the back of the altar, where only elders and the high seer were permitted, but they were too lost in song and trance to notice the breach. He unwrapped the cloth given to him by the priestess. It shimmered darkly even in the dim light, absorbing the flickers of flame rather than reflecting them. He spread it carefully on the ground and poured the ash in a line around it. His hands trembled, not with fear but anticipation. He whispered the incantation again. Darkness displaced, fire embrace, fate replace. Then he struck the fire. A small torch he had hidden under his cloak flared to life. He dropped it onto the cloth and ash. The fire caught immediately. But it was no ordinary flame. It hissed blue and black, rising in a spiral that twisted unnaturally, as if drawn by breathless hunger. The ashes sparked, tiny motes of light shooting up like dying stars. Then the flames moved, snaking low across the ground, ignoring grass and wind. They lunged toward the open square, toward Nia. She had just bowed. As she rose, the flames touched the edge of her shadow. She froze. It was as if the world paused with her. The drums faltered, the air thickened, and even the moon itself seemed to blink. Then the screaming began, not hers but the sound of the earth groaning, of spirits stirred too soon. The sacred flame behind her reared like a serpent. Nia's body trembled violently, her limbs spasming. Her shadow twisted, writhed, and then tore itself from her feet. It didn't vanish. It burned. With a hiss that was both thunder and weeping, her shadow curled into the black fire and vanished. Nia dropped to the ground. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Women ran forward. Men pulled back. The seer dropped his staff. Children cried. Someone shouted, "Witchcraft!" Another, "It's the gods." But no one could explain what they saw. The flames were gone. No smoke. No ash. Only Nia's collapsed body and the eerie fact that even in the light of the full moon she cast no shadow. She did not die. When the elders reached her, she was still breathing, slow, shallow, like someone dreaming too deeply. They carried her to the healer's hut. Her body was untouched, not even a scorch on her skin. But her eyes did not flutter and her lips did not move. It was as if something had been pulled from within her, some tether that anchored her to the world. The villagers murmured in the dark. Some believed she had been chosen by the gods. Others whispered she had become a vessel for something dark. But all agreed on one thing. Something sacred had been broken that night. Something old and watching had been offended. Jimo slipped away unnoticed. He retreated to his sleeping mat, heart pounding so hard it made his ears ring. He had done it. He had taken her shadow. He had broken her fate. The power would come to him now, slowly perhaps but surely. He would become what the village feared. What they bowed to. He lay down, smiling. But sleep never came. That night his room filled with whispers. Not voices. Movements. The creaking of rafters where nothing hung. The rustling of straw that wasn't touched. He felt watched. Not by eyes but by presence, dense, cold, and knowing. He told himself it was imagination. But when he awoke the next morning, his own shadow was longer than it should have been. It curled slightly at the end like a tendril. Back in the healer's hut, Nia awoke just before sunrise. Her eyes fluttered open, not groggy but sharp. Alert. The healer, who had been dozing by her side, startled. "Child?" she whispered. "You're awake." But Nia said nothing. Her gaze wandered to the door. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She sat up with effort, steadying herself with hands that felt too light. The healer brought water. "Rest. Something happened last night, Nia. We don't know what. But your shadow?" "I know," Nia said quietly. Her voice had changed. Not in tone but in weight. It carried something older than her years. Something that felt like the stillness before a storm. "I saw it," she continued. "I was there." "Where, child?" "Inside the fire." The healer blinked. "No one goes into fire and returns." "I did." Nia stood slowly. Her body moved with effort as if relearning its limits. She stepped into the morning sun. Still, no shadow. Not even a faint outline. But where her shadow should have been, the ground shivered. Birds in the trees above went silent. Far across the village, Jimo sat in the shade, watching ants march through dust. He grinned when he saw her rise from the hut. To him, her survival meant little. What mattered was that her power was gone. The strange whispers, the flickering glances, the awe, those would fade. Now he would rise. But then he looked at the ground behind her. Still no shadow. He smiled wider. Until he looked again. Not behind her. Around her. The earth was wrong. The light bent slightly at her edges. Not a shadow, no. A space, a distortion. Like something invisible yet present. Something waiting. Nia turned her head toward him. And for a moment he felt as if her gaze reached through him, into the place where his lies lived. He shuddered. That night, Nia did not sleep. She sat under the tamarind tree listening, not to the wind but to something else. Her hands trembled not with fear but with awakening. Inside her, something moved. It was not the shadow she had lost. It was something it had left behind. Nia stepped barefoot into the morning light, her skin kissed by dawn but casting no trace behind her. The sun rose without warmth on her face. She watched as other children skipped past the healer's hut, eyes catching her presence before quickly darting away. Mothers clutched their toddlers closer. Even the old widow who once gave Nia roasted groundnuts every morning turned her back, muttering something into the collar of her wrapper. The world had turned, and Nia was not welcome in its new orbit. She tried to speak to them. To explain. To ask if anyone else had seen the fire bend unnaturally during the moon festival. But when she opened her mouth, people flinched, not at the sound of her voice, but at her very attempt to speak. They acted like her words might carry curses or misfortune, as though silence was the only gift she had left to give the world. She visited the riverbank, a place she had once found solace. But when she dipped her hands into the water, the fish scattered in panicked frenzy, vanishing beneath lily pads. She waited, hands still in the current, but nothing returned. Not even the dragonflies that usually skimmed the surface dared come near. That night, as dusk draped over the land, she stood before her hut and looked down. Nothing. No shadow. Not under the orange glow of the setting sun. Not beneath the swaying lanterns outside her father's compound. There was only dust where her feet touched, dry and unmarked. She touched her arms, her chest, her face. She was still there. She could still feel. But it felt incomplete, like wearing a song without its melody. Inside her a coldness coiled. It wasn't the kind of chill that made one shiver. It was quieter. Constant. It lived beneath her ribs and pulsed like a second heartbeat. She hadn't felt it the night before. But now it was there, pressing, whispering, alert. Animals sensed it before she did. The family goat, usually docile and affectionate, bleated in terror the moment she neared the fence. Chickens that once pecked lazily near her feet flapped into trees when she approached. Even the village dogs, once loyal enough to follow her to the stream, lowered their heads and whined, tails curled under their bellies. Nia no longer walked the village paths during the day. It was easier to move in darkness, where people would not see the absence trailing behind her. But the absence wasn't trailing anymore. It was following. One evening, with the moon rising low and orange, she ventured into the forest, the only place untouched by whispers and judging eyes. The trees knew nothing of rumors. The ground did not care about shadows. She moved slowly through the underbrush, her feet silent, not a twig cracking under her step. The cold inside her pulsed gently, like breath on the back of her neck. She paused near a familiar tree, one she and her mother used to visit, long before memories turned into legends. It was thick and twisted, its bark carved with old prayer marks. She touched it. Then she heard it. A sound, not quite a voice. Not wind either. It was a hush, a presence. A soft rustle without leaves. A pressure in the air behind her. She turned. There, in the moonlight, was a shape. Not her shadow. Not exactly. It was a smear of dark, standing upright, not clinging to the earth but suspended like breath in a cold room. It shifted when she moved. It leaned forward when she did. But it was not bound to her feet. It floated, deliberate and unchained. Nia backed away. The thing did not follow. Instead, it hovered still, watching. If watching was something shadows could do. And then, before she could think, before she could run or scream, it moved. Not toward her. Beside her. It walked a few steps, then stopped. As if inviting. Nia hesitated. Then stepped forward. The thing moved with her, not attached but alongside. She blinked. It blinked. Not with eyes but with motion. Together they walked deeper into the woods. That was the first night the forest did not feel lonely. That was also the night Nia began to understand. Her old shadow was gone, but in its place had come something else. Not born of light but of will. Meanwhile, in the heart of the village, Jimo was transforming. Since the night of the festival, the villagers had begun treating him differently. It wasn't instant, respect was slow to grow. But little things shifted. Elders nodded when he passed. Girls lingered longer near the well when he fetched water. Even the men who once dismissed him as the overlooked boy, now sought his opinions during yam sorting. But the most unsettling change was in his shadow. It had grown. Not all at once, but steadily as if feeding on something unseen. At first, Jimo thought it was the angle of the sun. But even indoors, by firelight or lantern, his shadow stretched unnaturally far behind him. Not jagged or monstrous, just longer than it should be. Sharper at the edges. He began seeing it before he stepped into a room. At night, when he turned over in bed, it was already curled on the wall, waiting. He never spoke of it. Instead, he leaned into the attention. He told the elders he had dreams filled with ancestral guidance. He began wearing beads he claimed had been blessed by a forest seer. He even suggested holding a second moon ritual to restore balance, though he never said from what. People listened. Because while Nia grew colder, quieter, and more avoided, Jimo glowed. His skin seemed brighter, his laughter louder, his posture straighter. He bathed in the space Nia had once filled. But the glow was a lie. At night, he sweated in terror, clutching his mat as whispers crept into his hut. He heard footsteps on thatch, saw his shadow flicker across walls when no flame burned. He heard his name being spoken, not aloud but inside his skull. He dared not return to the priestess. Her hut in the forest had collapsed days after the ritual. Some said it was lightning. Others, punishment. Either way she was gone. Jimo was alone, with a shadow that seemed more alive than he was. Back in the woods, Nia sat near the twisted tree, her not shadow floating beside her like a guardian. She had not named it. She had not touched it. But she understood something vital. It was not a tool. It was not hers to command. It was choosing to walk with her. And every night it did, the cold inside her settled. Became familiar. Her senses sharpened. She could hear beetles scurrying beneath roots. She could smell the difference between old rain and new mist. She knew when someone entered the woods even before leaves shifted. Once, she passed a clearing and saw two young boys from the village gathering firewood. One spotted her. Dropped his stick. They both ran without screaming. Later, Nia heard the whispers. They say she walks with a demon now. They say her shadow waits in the trees. They say she never sleeps. All of it wrong. Yet somehow all of it right. Because Nia had become a vessel, half girl, half mystery. She did not speak to the darkness. But sometimes she felt its replies. When she thought of her mother, the air would warm briefly. When she remembered the betrayal, the night would deepen, become still. She began to dream again. But not in colors or voices. In motions. The movement of shadows. The turn of time. The slow crawl of power shifting. In these dreams, Jimo stood on a hill of flame, laughing. But beneath his feet the earth cracked. And something reached up, not to pull him down but to take back what had been stolen. One evening as she returned from the forest's edge, she heard singing. A group of villagers gathered near the fire pit, dancing to a rhythm she once knew. At the center was Jimo leading the chant. The people clapped, even cheered. But Nia saw their shadows flicker unnaturally. She saw their feet move out of time for a breath, as if something beneath the earth were rearranging them. Jimo caught her gaze. He grinned. She did not return it. Instead, she turned and walked into the dark. Her shadow, no, her companion, followed. And for the first time it smiled. Not with a mouth, but with the ripple of power it left behind, stirring dust and silence like the promise of reckoning. The village did not yet know. This was not the end of the curse. It was the beginning of the balance. It began subtly. The first time Nia noticed her shadow returning, she was kneeling at the edge of the forest, fingers buried in the earth. The dusk light curled around her, long and golden, and when she lifted her head, something darker than soil stretched beside her. Not connected. Not quite. It lingered, uncertain, a smudge against the leaves. But it moved when she did, not beneath her but beside. A silent twin made of will and memory. She did not flinch. She only whispered, "I see you." And the shadow nodded. It wasn't like the shadows cast by sun or fire. It flickered where no flame burned, stood where no light fell. It did not cling to surfaces but hovered just above them, trailing slightly behind like a cautious companion. At night it grew bolder. While she slept, it would stand at the edge of her mat, swaying slightly. Sometimes it circled her in slow arcs as though checking for intruders. Other nights, it lay beside her, formless, comforting, like warmth in the cold absence that had lived within her since the moon festival. But it also spoke. Not in language but in thought. In feelings. It would send her dreams of things not yet born. It whispered in her sleep of winds that refused to blow, rivers that turned away from thirsty mouths, fields that grew only silence. And every morning she woke knowing more than she had the night before. Not facts, but truths. Unshaped and ancient. The world was changing. And the darkness was watching. The village, meanwhile, was unraveling. The rains came too early. Then not at all. One moment, clouds choked the sky and unleashed torrents that drowned the new yam sprouts. Days later, the earth cracked dry beneath their feet, refusing water like a child rejecting medicine. Crows, once rare, now gathered in unnatural flocks. They screamed from rooftops, circled in the afternoon heat, and watched with eyes too human. Children swore they saw one laughing. A widow buried her hen and came back to find the bird resurrected, pecking quietly in her compound with one wing missing but no blood. Fruit turned sour before ripening. Goats gave birth to kids with no eyes. Thunderstorms came with no lightning, only sound, deep booms that rattled bones but brought no rain, like angry drums echoing across the hills. And through it all, Jimo walked with his growing shadow. He pretended nothing was wrong. He danced at ceremonies. He attended elders' councils. He smiled at the people and told them balance was returning, that the ancestors were simply testing their faith. But at night the truth found him. In his dreams his own shadow turned against him. It no longer obeyed. When he turned in sleep, it would loom over him like a towering figure. He'd wake to find it stretched across the ceiling, motionless but menacing. Sometimes it whispered. Unlike Nia's shadow, Jimo spoke in words. And the words were cruel. You stole what was not yours. You wear fate like stolen skin. She is coming. At first he tried to ignore it. But then it moved in waking hours. Once, while sharpening a blade, he set the knife down on a mat. He turned to reach for a calabash, and when he looked back, the blade had moved 3 paces across the floor. No one else was in the hut. Another time, he caught his own reflection in a pot of water, and the shadow behind him was not making the same gesture. It waved. He no longer slept without a fire lit. He kept charms at every door, whispered protection spells he only half believed. But none of it helped. He could feel it. The darkness around him wasn't his anymore. And neither was the village. Nia had stopped trying to be invisible. She walked through the market now, shadow at her side. People moved aside, forming a respectful path that was more fear than reverence. She did not speak. She did not threaten. But the air changed when she passed. The potter's clay cracked in her presence. The oil vendor's lamp would flicker out without wind. The fishmonger claimed the fish blinked twice when she looked at them. Children watched from behind their mother's legs, wide-eyed. They did not run anymore, just stared as if expecting a story to unfold before them. And sometimes Nia would look at them, really look. The brave ones didn't look away. She began hearing their voices too, not out loud but in the soft fabric of the world. A baby crying meant a warning. A palm frond falling meant someone nearby was lying. She read omens like footsteps. She saw cracks in the air. The darkness wasn't just following her now. It was listening. One stormless night, the village square fell silent mid-chant. The drummer stopped drumming. All at once, every shadow in the square twitched, not toward the firelight but away, as if bowing to something unseen. People screamed. One woman collapsed, claiming she'd seen her dead husband's face in her child's silhouette. Another man ran into the forest and never returned. The elders gathered the next morning, sweat beading their foreheads despite the cool breeze. It is the girl, one whispered. Her missing shadow brought all this. No, another said trembling. It's the boy. He did something. He changed the balance. They were born on the same day, muttered the oldest among them. Maybe this was always coming. No one agreed. But all of them felt it. The darkness was alive. And it was choosing sides. Jimo decided to confront Nia. He found her at the forest edge, her back to the setting sun, her knot shadow thick beside her. He came alone, though every instinct screamed at him to bring others, to bring torches, to bring anything. But his pride outweighed his fear. Nia, he said, voice tighter than he meant. You have to stop this. She didn't turn. Stop what? This thing you've become. This plague you bring. The land is dying. I bring nothing, she replied. Only the truth walks with me now. It's your fault. I know it is. Nia turned then, slowly, the shadow moving like a second body. Do you? Her voice was calm, too calm. Jimo took a step forward. I did what I had to. You were cursed. No, she said, eyes glowing faintly. You were impatient. And now you carry a lie that's chewing through your soul. He faltered. You don't know what you're talking about. But he knew she did. And so did his shadow, which at that moment slipped free from his feet and circled around him, on its own. Jimo gasped and tried to back away. But the ground beneath him felt loose, like ash. You feel it, don't you? Nia said. The thing you took? It was never meant for you. It's unraveling everything. I was supposed to be chosen, he yelled. You were nothing. Just a quiet girl with eyes too wide. And now those eyes see through you, she whispered. The shadow behind her shimmered, rising slightly from the ground like a breath taken in. Jimo ran. But even as he did, he felt his own shadow following, not dragging behind him but beside, mimicking his steps with a delay that felt intentional. That night the sky turned green. Not all at once. It began in the east. Just after the stars emerged, the color shifted, subtle and sickly. Clouds slithered across the moon like ink in water. The village fell into silence. And then came the birds. Thousands of them, black and loud, filling the trees, the rooftops, even the shrine. They did not sing. They only watched. By morning the village healer had vanished. The yam fields were dust. And not a single child laughed. The elders called a meeting, but no one came. Instead, people stood in doorways waiting for something. Anything. At noon, a child shouted from the hilltop. "Look, it's her." Nia was walking into the village, shadow beside her. It had lengthened. It no longer looked like her outline, it had grown wings or perhaps arms. Tendrils. It pulsed with her steps as if breathing. Jimo, watching from his doorway, dropped his calabash. She looked at him once. Only once. But the wind shifted. And his own shadow recoiled. He turned, ran inside and slammed the door. But he knew the truth. His shadow had abandoned him. And it had gone to her. By the end of that week, the village knew two things. The darkness was no longer just a curse or a punishment. It was a presence. And it had chosen. Not because of goodness. Not because of power. But because it remembered something the people had forgotten. Balance is not silence. It is reckoning. And reckoning always casts a long shadow. No one saw her arrive. At dawn, the village square lay still, the silence heavy after a night of restless dreams. Then, like mist rising from the earth, the old woman stood in the center, hooded, barefoot, her eyes a cloudy white that never blinked. Children whispered that she had no footprints. Elders froze mid-step. Even the dogs lowered their heads, whining softly as they backed away. The oracle had come. No one had summoned her, yet everyone felt the pull of her presence. She spoke no greetings. She only raised her carved staff and turned her milky gaze to the sky. "Your land is choking on a stolen soul," she said. "And the ancestors are not silent. They are circling." The villagers gathered slowly, drawn by fear more than curiosity. Nia stood at the edge, her shadow alive and alert at her side. Jimo lingered behind a hut, pale, his own shadow flickering unnaturally. The oracle lifted her chin. "In every child, a shadow is born, a guardian spirit. It is not just darkness but memory, will, and balance. When one steals another's, they disturb the line that holds the world upright." She paused, letting her words sink like stones into water. "One sibling has suffered," she said, turning toward Nia. "And her shadow has returned, no longer bound by light. The other." She turned her blind eyes in Jimo's direction. "Will serve." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jimo stepped forward, trembling. "Serve? Serve what?" The oracle pointed her staff to the ground. The earth beneath cracked slightly. "The darkness now breathes. It has watched you both. It knows betrayal and it knows pain. Now it must choose a vessel." Nia's voice cut through the air. "And if it chooses wrong?" The oracle nodded as if pleased by the question. "It cannot choose wrong. It chooses what the world needs most. A wound must be closed, but with blood, not cloth. Justice must walk." She turned again, lifting her staff high. "When balance is broken, the spirit of shadow awakens. It walks not as servant or slave, but as judge." Then her voice dropped, low as thunder in the distance. "One of you is the scar. The other is the blade." She said no more. The wind stirred as if the forest itself had sighed. The oracle walked through the villagers, never touching anyone, but leaving the scent of smoke and rain behind. By the time she reached the forest's edge, she was gone, vanished between heartbeats. No one spoke for a long time. But everyone looked at Nia. And everyone feared Jimo. Because now they understood. The darkness would not be banished. It would be satisfied. Jimo's world, once clear and certain, began to unravel like frayed cloth. At first, the changes were subtle, shifts in his shadow's shape, shadows that lingered longer than they should, creeping along walls even when the sun was high. He brushed it off as tricks of the mind, signs of stress born from his envy and the ritual's tension. But soon the shadows stopped obeying him. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Jimo caught sight of his reflection in the water's surface near the well. It should have been him, staring back with familiar eyes, but the image smiled wickedly when he did not. It moved independently, tilting its head, gesturing with fingers as if beckoning him closer to something unspeakable. He blinked and the reflection froze, returning to mimicry. His breath caught, a cold dread curled in his chest. He tried to tell the villagers, but they only shunned him further. The oracle's prophecy echoed in his mind like a cruel mantra. One sibling is the scar. The other is the blade. Was he becoming the wound? Or the weapon? At night, voices whispered from the well outside his window. At first, faint like wind through leaves, then clearer, mocking him, pleading, cursing. "You cannot escape. You belong to the darkness now," they hissed. The trees outside seemed to lean closer, their branches scratching at his shutters like accusing fingers. Jimo's footsteps echoed long after he had passed. In the empty rooms of the house, his shadow stretched impossibly tall, creeping along the walls, twisting into monstrous shapes that seemed hungry for more. It gnawed at the edges of his sanity. Once, he reached out to touch the shadow, desperate to reclaim it, but it recoiled, almost alive, flickering between forms, sometimes almost human, sometimes a black void. He began to lash out. His temper grew violent and unpredictable. Friends and neighbors avoided him, whispering about the curse that had fallen upon his family. The shadow's hunger became his own. He felt hollow, ravenous for power, for control, yet slipping further from himself with each passing day. Jimo's nights were plagued by dreams where he stood in a void, surrounded by shadows that swallowed light whole. They spoke in tongues of old magic, promising dominion but demanding sacrifice. In the dreamscape he saw Nia, not the girl he had envied, but a towering figure cloaked in darkness, her eyes glowing like embers, commanding legions of shadow beasts. He awoke gasping, cold sweat soaking his skin, the echo of those words ringing in his mind, "The darkness chooses its vessel." He realized too late that the ritual had not made him master of the shadow, it had made him its servant. The power he sought now demanded more than obedience. It demanded surrender. Desperation drove Jimo deeper into isolation. He sought out the forbidden priestess again, begging for a way to break free. But her smile was grim. "The shadow you burned lives on," she said. "It grows because it must. You cannot destroy what the world needs to balance itself." The lines between reality and nightmare blurred. Jimo's reflection no longer obeyed him at all. Sometimes it would grin maliciously when he was calm, or frown when he was enraged, as if mocking his emotions. At other times, it screamed silently, tears of shadow streaming from its eyes. At last, the hunger overtook him fully. He could feel the shadow stirring beneath his skin, clawing to be released. His eyes darkened, voice rasping. The darkness within whispered promises of strength and immortality, but at the cost of his soul. His descent was complete when one moonless night, the villagers heard guttural growls and saw a monstrous silhouette stalking the outskirts of the compound. A shadow larger than any man, moving with terrible intent. Jimo was no longer himself. He was the darkness, and the darkness was hungry. Nia stood at the edge of the clearing, calm and poised, the soft rustle of the night breeze whispering through the trees around her. Beside her, her shadow no longer the mere absence of light but a living, breathing presence. A tall, ethereal figure cloaked in swirling smoke that shifted and flowed with a will of its own. The villagers had long whispered tales about her shadow, but none had ever witnessed it take form like this, until now. Across the clearing Jimo appeared, his silhouette distorted, his shadow stretched unnaturally long behind him. His eyes, wild with desperation, flickered between fear and rage as he faced the sister he had once tormented. The air around them thickened, charged with a tension that made the hairs on Nia's arms stand on end. Jimo's voice cracked as he called out, "Nia, please don't do this. It's not too late. We can fix this, together." But Nia said nothing. Her gaze was steady, her breath even. The shadow beside her shifted, tendrils of smoke curling forward as if to answer a silent summons. Jimo took a step back, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The shadows around him seemed to twitch and coil, responding to an unseen force. His own shadow loomed larger than ever, but it was no longer his ally, it writhed like a living creature, hungry and restless. "I never wanted this," Jimo shouted, panic rising in his voice. "You stole everything from me." Nia's eyes softened, but the shadow at her side swelled, a dark wave of power that seemed to pulse with ancient energy. It moved closer to Jimo, enveloping the space between them with cold, smoky tendrils. "You took from yourself long ago, Jimo," Nia finally spoke, her voice calm but resolute. "This is not about stealing or revenge. It is about balance." Jimo screamed as the darkness surged forward, swallowing the light around him. The smoky figure circled him, binding him in its embrace, yet it was not Nia's shadow that had come to claim him, it was the darkness itself, ancient and impartial, serving justice beyond human desire. He clawed at the smoky chains, shouting for mercy, for Nia to save him, but there was no salvation from the darkness he had chosen. The village held its breath as the night swallowed his cries. And when the last echo faded, only silence remained. Nia lowered her gaze and reached out, touching the ground where her shadow had been reborn. It shimmered softly, no longer a curse but a guardian restored. The darkness had chosen. And it had chosen Jimo. Balance was returned, not by hatred, but by the reckoning of forces beyond mortal control. This scene captures the climax with vivid imagery and emotional depth, emphasizing the supernatural justice that unfolds without personal vengeance. After that fateful night, the village awoke to a silence unlike any before. Jimo was gone. His small hut stood empty, the door hanging ajar, the air around it thick and icy as if the very warmth had been drained from the place. The villagers whispered nervously, stealing cautious glances at the shadow that sometimes drifted through the compound on moonlit nights, a shadow that belonged to no living man. No one dared enter Jimo's hut for days, and when they finally did, they found it abandoned, the remnants of hastily left possessions scattered like echoes of a man who had slipped away into the darkness. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, only an unnatural chill that clung to the walls and floors. Meanwhile, Nia walked through the village differently. Her presence was serene, her steps light but purposeful, and always, her shadow danced beside her under the silver moonlight. Unlike the ominous and restless shadows of the past, hers was gentle, flickering with a soft glow, as if alive with unseen energy. Villagers soon came to recognize her in a new light, not just as the girl who had suffered but as a healer whose power was both a mystery and a blessing. Mothers brought their sick children to her door, elders sought her counsel, and the young listened intently when she spoke of the spirits that whispered through the trees and the shadows that guarded them all. Nia never claimed to control the darkness but acknowledged its presence as a partner, a guardian that walked with her through the veil between worlds. She taught the village to honor the shadows, to see beyond fear and superstition, and to embrace the balance that governed life and death, light and dark. Legends grew around her, stories of how she could speak to spirits lost in the twilight, how her shadow could stretch to shield the village from harm, and how her touch could mend wounds both physical and spiritual. The once feared darkness became a symbol of protection, a testament to the harmony that can arise when fear is replaced by understanding. As for Jimo, the villagers came to accept his disappearance as part of the curse rewritten, a fate tied not to destruction but to transformation. Some believed his shadow wandered alone, cursed to seek redemption in realms unseen. Others whispered that the darkness he had once tried to command had finally claimed him, binding him to a fate beyond mortal reckoning. In time, the village flourished, bathed in the quiet strength of Nia's presence and the protective dance of her shadow beneath the moon. Balance was restored, not through vengeance or cruelty, but through the acceptance of darkness as an essential part of the world's rhythm. The story of the girl whose shadow was burned and the brother who vanished into the night became a timeless lesson, that power wielded without wisdom leads only to ruin, but when darkness and light walk together, they weave the fabric of life itself. And so, the curse was rewritten, not as a tale of loss, but as one of healing, redemption, and the eternal dance between shadow and light.